Coming in a little hot.
Coming in a little hot. Now it's very pleasant. Microphone discipline and all that. We'll get to all of that, trust me.
You go by Alex, or is one of you Alexander, the other Alex? How does this work here?
Thanks, Andrew. I like you already.
It's just as confusing as you would expect.
This is really funny that you guys are having me here for Consec, because I actually am terrified by Consec. It's
Oh my god! That's exactly what we were going to talk about. Get out! Are you really? Cool. Awesome.
conversation. I'm going to be brutally honest.
I mean, Jonathan's not here today, so somebody has to be controversial,
Okay, good. I will definitely say things that are probably not socially acceptable for interpreters to say in public, as far as what's difficult about consecutive.
So, hello everyone. This is a podcast that keeps interpreters up at night, and this is Alex Gansmeyer coming in hot from Munich, and equally hot coming in from Brussels is Alex Drexel. Hello, Alex. How are you?
Hey, Alex. Good to see you. It's definitely hot here in Brussels, and we're expecting the hottest day ever on record in Brussels. So that's something, I guess, not to look forward to this week.
The hottest day ever on record. That's not great. Well, it was pretty hot in the booth today, but I guess that's normal, right?
Both figuratively and literally.
Absolutely. So Jonathan is not here with us today, so it's only a troublesome duo, because I believe he's putting finishing touches on another book that he might potentially be writing. But I think we can neither confirm or deny that, so he'll just have to tell you guys about it next time. But we are not just the troublesome two today. Alex, who's joining us today?
Yeah, we have a very special guest with us tonight, and the first name starts with an A as well, which was not the reason for bringing him on the show, but it just so happens, which is nice. Welcome to Andrew Belisle, who is joining us from Spokane. Oh no, I'm getting it wrong again. Tell us, what's the correct pronunciation again?
Spokane. It's
Spokane.
Spokane, Washington. Good morning, good evening, wherever the listeners are. It's nice to be here. Thanks, guys, for having me, to both Alexes.
Yeah, it's great having you on. Yeah, because this was maybe not last minute, but fairly last minute, I guess. So we organized this fairly quickly, which is nice, but that doesn't always happen. So
it rarely happens. So thanks, Andrew, for being so accommodating.
Of course, thanks. I was flattered when you guys asked me to come on. This is going to be fun. It already is fun. And we barely begun.
That's the idea. True. Yeah. And we know Andrew from Twitter, basically. Is that right? I think we never met in person.
That's right. We never have. I don't think. Not yet. Fingers crossed someday, though.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
There has to be some kind of ATA conference or something where we're going to meet.
I think so. I've met a couple Twitter interpreters thus far in real life, and it's always been great. It's super cool to connect on Twitter and then meet up in person. It's always really fun.
It's kind of surreal, though, isn't it? Like, I always find when you meet someone from online who it's kind of like, oh, you're actually a real person now.
It's like this disconnect in virtual reality, and all this reality and virtual reality meet, and you feel like it's maybe like an Inception sort of situation.
Absolutely. Yes.
But in a good way. Totally in a good way.
In a good way, in a very positive way. It's always been really fun.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is not really in real life, but at least, it's not just on Twitter. So I think it's a first step, which is good. And I think the reason we wanted to bring you on the show was that, at least from your Twitter feed, Alex and I had the impression that you like to do consecutive interpreting, and that brings us straight to today's topic, because certainly with my colleagues in the European Commission, and this was the topic of the one of the recent episodes where we talked about EU interpreting, where we do basically 99% simultaneous, and some colleagues haven't done consecutive in literally decades, and of course are then totally afraid of doing it. But even people who are fresh out of university, some of them don't really like consecutive for some reason. So we wanted to explore that a little bit today.
That's great. Great topic. I'm here for it.
Yeah, literally. I'm going to throw the question to you as well, Alex. How much consecutive do you do sort of on average?
I now do actually more than I used to do, because I didn't used to do any And now I do some supervisory board calls. They're called pre-alignment calls. And obviously, because it's only like an hour and a half, people don't actually fly in. They just, call in with the infamous speaker phone call and whatever. And yeah, that has to be consecutive because there's no way that they're going to shell out the money for the simultaneous system. So I now do those things consecutively. It's kind of a mix between consecutive and then whispering to the one guy that I'm doing the consecutive off. But yeah, so now I've kind of almost gotten used to it again, I guess, in that very particular context.
Yeah, but I think before I was probably getting a little bit ahead of myself here because, I mean, first of all, Andrew, talk to us a little bit about your background. How did you get into interpreting in the first place? And then we'll talk about consecutive a little bit later.
Yeah.
Sure, definitely. Let's see. How can I summarize my background? I've wanted to be an interpreter for a very long time. I think I was interested in it since my, let's say, late teens. I didn't know for sure that it's what I wanted to do, but it was always kind of at the forefront of my mind. I had a somewhat migratory upbringing due to my parents' work. I was born in Japan. We moved back and forth between Japan and the States twice when I was a young kid. I went to a part of elementary school in Japan. We moved back to the States. I was here until I was 17, and then I did an exchange year in Germany, in the Saarland.
Oh, of all places.
Yes, of all places. Oh my gosh, if we could just do a whole episode about the Saarland, that would be great.
Next time.
Okay, we'll put a pin on that for next time, yeah.
So I was there, and then for my last year of high school, essentially, and then I just continued on and went to a Welsh university where I was on with German, Spanish, and French. It was kind of the only university I could find that would let me do 3 languages balanced because I didn't know that I wanted to study interpreting. I just knew that I was good at languages, I liked them, and I wanted to explore as many as possible before sort of hunkering down and picking one career path.
And was this Cardiff University? Sorry.
This was Bangor University, so in the very north, Cardiff being in the very south, and just go straight up to the other tip of Wales, and there I was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And with the program, I had the opportunity to do 3 Erasmus semesters, which sent me to Vienna, Austria, Granada, Spain, and then I was in Lausanne in Switzerland for a semester. I never did interpreting with French. I just did it as a foreign language at the École Française Étrangère. But then in Vienna, in Granada, I was at the translating and interpreting departments for both of those semesters, and I got a chance to explore. And basically, that was when I was like, yep, this is it. This is what I want to do. So I moved back to the States a little bit later. Was back and forth for a couple years after that. But then I started interpreting full-time here in Spokane with medical, just kind of getting some experience. There's a lot of medical here, so you can fill up your schedule, but the pay isn't great, so you kind of want to progress from that. Let's see, how long ago now? A little more than a year ago, I got court certified. I was sworn in by the Administrative Office of the Courts in Washington, started working in local state courts in Washington State, Idaho State. Then this year, I started subcontracting with the Department of Justice to interpret in federal immigration courts, which is basically what I do full-time now. Travel around the country. I'm mostly gone about 75-80% of the time traveling, and it's grueling, it's intense, it's very, very interesting. It's a very intense thing to be a part of up close, but pretty rewarding a lot of the time. Sometimes very difficult, very sad, but I guess that's it. That's up till now. So
that's super interesting, though. So, like, how did you end up interpreting? Because I mean, you did stuff with languages. You did all the Erasmus semesters. You've obviously been all over the globe. But like, how did you end up deciding, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to become an interpreter. And then the path that you went down on, like the medical interpreting, because there's also like a big step to do initially. You know, it's not just like, hey, I'm interpreting like how the weather's going to be tomorrow. No, I'm immediately going straight into medical interpreting.
Well, I went into medical interpreting because it was the easiest thing to sort of jump into to dip your toe into at the beginning. And so I knew when I did my Erasmus semesters, because I was at like I said, it's the Facultad de Traducción e Interpretación in Spain, in Granada, the interpreting department, and then the Zentrum für Transaktionswissenschaft in Vienna. And when I was at both of those departments, I absolutely knew that that's what I wanted to do once I did semesters there. It completely sold me. And since then, I've never had the slightest inkling that I wanted to do something even a little bit different than this. So that solidified it for me. And that's kind of the progression, how it tends to work in the US. Of course, it depends on your location. It depends greatly on your location, but it's very easy to start and sort of enter the medical interpreting world because you get some experience, see if you like that kind of interpreting. And then a lot of people from there transition into the court world, which is where you can then kind of make a viable income, I guess.
It's really interesting because it seems, with my very limited experience and only from the German freelance market, it seems to be completely the other way around, because the whole medical interpreting isn't really a thing yet, I think, in Germany. And Alex, please correct me if I'm sort of completely getting things wrong here. But medical interpreting, I think, for sort of the conference segment would be like medical conferences.
Oh, yeah.
So
totally.
completely different segment. And then it's interesting that you said that actually moving into legal was something that allowed you to make a better living, I guess, which I think, again, is completely the opposite in Germany, because legal interpreting is extremely badly paid. And I think it's even worse in Austria. And I think they have just read today on Twitter
that
they're
articles about that from the Austrian press and how they're actually even lowering the standards even still, I think, is what I understand.
It's pretty awful, yeah.
I mean, it's the same in the UK, though, right? I mean, because, you know, with the PSI sector, it's very much under pressure. Health care or help, like, you know, hospital, doctor visits, all those kinds of things, they're not really, oh my God, I'm probably going to get crucified for this, but I'm not sure if they're really professionalized over here. I know there's some remote interpreting going on here, like remote, like dialogue interpreting, so semi-consecutive, I guess. But again, that's not, you know, the best paid job in the world, because they're pretty much paying you like by the minute or like by the quarter hour or whatever.
I mean, we're paid by the quarter of, well, it's 1 hour minimum for medical. The interesting thing is, though, that for Washington is it has a very regulated system for medical interpreting. And as part of the Medicaid, Medicare, which is the state funded healthcare, you're entitled to an interpreter through that system. So there's actually very good access to healthcare interpreters for people who need it.
That's awesome.
And the hourly pay is actually decent. Of course, it's just getting enough hours, and you have to plug your schedule with so many appointments that it becomes a little bit impractical in the long run. But in Washington, it's actually very impressive how well it's regulated and the standards that are in place to grant that to LEPs, limited English proficiency individuals. So
that's really interesting, I have to say. No, but so that's really interesting. But then you transitioned into court interpreting, which is what you do now. Most of the time. I don't know if that's all you do now, like if it's exclusively what you want to do, or is it
I would say now it's about 85-90% exclusive. I'll occasionally take medical appointments for clinics I still appreciate working with, but exclusive. So how it works in the States, I'm sure you guys have heard this before, is each state has their own court certification, and then there's a federal level as well. So I worked on the state certification from Washington. I passed late 2017, was sworn in 2018, and then that opens, up all these possibilities to interpret in local courts. There's not a lot of that in my state, so I was able to kind of do 50-50 between medical and local court. But then when I started interpreting with the Department of Justice for Federal Immigration Court, that's when I had all of this schedule open up to me, where they just have countless hours available, because I'm sure it's in the news every day. You hear about the backlog of 900,000 cases or whatever it is. So, if I want to, I could be doing that all day, every day. It's just the question of how much can your brain and your spirit take with that kind of stuff. So, I've been doing that. Basically, federal immigration courts, I've been doing that about 70% of the time for the past 3 or 4 months now. So that's where I'm at.
And what does it, what does it look like, a typical case, I guess, in federal immigration court? Is it people sort of applying for asylum, or what kind of cases do you work for?
Yeah, good question. So I mostly work in detained settings, which could look like either a traditional courtroom with a judge behind a bench. And in those situations, if it's a traditional courtroom, they give us simultaneous equipment, where we have the mic and then the respondent, the Spanish speaker, sit at a desk a little ways in front of you, usually about 20 feet in front of you. In the detained settings, they're mostly all asylum cases or potential asylum cases. And it's either them coming for a short hearing before the judge, where they kind of have a status update. And the judge will have to hear dozens of those every single day. Or there's what's called a merits hearing, which is basically like a mini immigration trial for somebody seeking asylum or cases similar to asylum, where they have to present their case before a judge, and they may have a lawyer with them or they may not. And those can last anywhere from an hour if it's a simple case, or they can sometimes last all day or multiple days. I've been at ones that have been continued over 3 different days just because of how complex they are. Right. So that's where the consecutive comes into play. That's where about at least 50% of it is consecutive, because you're doing respondent testimony, witness testimony before the court for that entire hearing. So that's what it looks like. And in the detained hearing, it's people who are there in the facility. So they're not, traveling to make the appointment. They're actually already there, and they're just brought to the courtroom. So that answers your question.
It does, yeah.
It does. Right. So with the consecutive that you do in court, I mean, we've seen your notes on Twitter, and if our audience hasn't, I'm sure they're going to be looking it up like in just a moment. You kind of have like a little bit of a reputation now on Twitter for having extraordinarily ridiculously clean notes, and it's like, seriously, dude, like, what are you doing with your notes? Are you just making them up for Twitter, or is this really how you take notes?
First let me defend myself.
Go ahead.
I looked because so first Alex G sent me an email earlier for people who are listening and said, hey, can we use this picture of your notes for everybody? And I looked at it, and these were the ones that Alex G is referencing, and I looked at them and I was like, holy smokes, those are very neat. And so for disclaimer number 1, I swear on my life, those are actual notes from an actual appointment. They are not replicated notes.
But to be fair, most notes you have on Twitter, so there was like a plethora to choose from, and most look like this. I just picked it because you could see the iPad, which we're going to get into.
So here's the thing. Some of my notes do look like that. Some of them, depending on the hearing type, do not look like that. So a lot of the time, if I'm interpreting, and it's because of the difference in concepts. If I'm doing consecutive for an English speaker, say at the public defender's office or for a judge or something like that, the information is a lot more predictable and a lot more repetitive. So it's much easier to make consecutive notes out of it. If I were to show you, and maybe after this, I'm going to show a tweet, like abysmal notes that just look like an absolute just hot mess pile of garbage. Because most of the time, if I'm doing consec for a Spanish speaker in an immigration hearing, the stories are all over the place and absolutely unpredictable, with names, with terms, with places that I've never heard in my life. So you have to kind of establish the players in the story before you can have a neat consecutive. So a lot of the time, I would say at least 50% of the time, my notes look like a heaping pile of garbage that are just absolutely illegible. So I didn't mean to be deceptive by putting on just my prettiest notes, because sometimes they do look like that, but sometimes they don't. So just wanted to put that out there so there's nobody has the wrong impression here.
It kind of feels like there should be an Instagram account with just the most beautiful, consec notes neatly arranged on a table with a coffee cup.
I'd call like turn porn or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Consecutive porn.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh my God, that would be awesome.
Before we get into the note-taking, I was just wondering real quick if you could describe to us sort of what the situation looks like when you're in court, for example. Where do you sit, and what's sort of your location? Do you have a desk or something? What does it look like?
Yes, great question. So 2 different situations. If it's a traditional courtroom, I have a desk next to the judge at the front of the courtroom. Mm-hmm. And that's where we have the microphone, and then the Spanish speaker has his headset, so we can do whispered simultaneous when necessary. And then I have a mic in front of me for consec, so when it's consec, it's delivered for the whole courtroom. That probably is about 50% of the time that I'm in a traditional courtroom like that. The rest of the time, I'm in detained facilities where the judges are appearing over video, which is called VTC. And in those situations, I'm doing whispered interpreting the whole time and sitting right next to the Spanish speaker, the respondent. So it's very up close and personal. And because of the sound, how the sound is set up with the VTC, I have to whisper so it doesn't interfere with the recording over the video or the judges. And so the judge can hear the government attorney, but it's not interfered with by him or her hearing my interpretation into Spanish. So it's one of those 2 situations for the most part.
But it seems quite impractical, to say the least, if you have to hold the microphone, or is it just when you sort of give your rendition of what was being said?
So the microphone that's placed in front of us is one of those. I'm not sure what the technical name for it. It just sits in front of me, so I don't have to hold or touch it.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. Because sometimes that happens that you have to hold like a wireless mic, and that's extremely annoying because it's one less hand that you can use.
Yes.
No, luckily not. Yeah, that would be really cumbersome, and it's difficult as the conditions are a little rough in immigration court, so that would just be another added difficulty. But luckily, the traditional courtrooms are well equipped.
Okay, cool. But maybe let's talk about symbols for a minute, because it sounded like what you said earlier is that with the sort of fixed roles that there are in the courtroom, it sounded to me like you have a pretty decent glossary, quote unquote, glossary of symbols available. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah. So as far as you mean my personal symbols that I use for consec?
Yes.
So I've definitely developed in the past 4 months for immigration court specifically some pretty specific symbols of stuff that comes up, but I think they're probably ones that a lot of interpreters would recognize. Like I have some abbreviations for court terms, like a Greek pi for the government attorney, for prosecutor, and then I have I have a J for judge and things like that. But then with the consecutive for the Spanish speakers, when they're telling their stories for the asylum cases, I have a lot of ones relating to country and house and business and church and children and ones like that, because those come into play a lot of, I guess, what you would call, words for the family, or, terminology relating to the towns, the villages they come from. So I have a lot of those in place, and a lot of them are just very simple, like a box for a country,
right?
And then if it's a box with a dot inside, or if it's a house, it's a box with a roof. If it's a church, it's a box with a cross on top. Little things like that. And then arrows for direction, like I was leaving my house, an arrow out of the box. I was going to my house, an arrow into the box.
Yeah,
things like that really help. And the other thing that I try to do, but you really have to basically find out who the players in the story are before you can use the system, but when I have all the players, so for example, the police, the gang members, the vigilantes, the Spanish speaker, and the Spanish speaker's mother-in-law, or whatever the case is, I make a column on the left with each of those individual players, and then the column on the right is for the actions that each of those players perform. So I no longer have to write the subject for each action, rather the verb in the column. That works sometimes. Sometimes the story is all over the place, that it renders that option impractical.
Yes.
But that's also a tactic if the story permits.
But that's very interesting, because I just had to smile when you said, like, the box and then the box with the dot and all those kinds of things, because that's exactly how we learned it. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of universal. So this is really cool that it actually works, wherever you are, wherever you go.
I think I picked some of those up in Spain and in Austria as well. So some of it I don't remember if I picked it up from my semesters at the interpreting departments, or if they're my own.
Right.
It's all a little fuzzy now, but I think a lot of other interpreters use those same systems, because the arrows and the direction, it's so practical, especially some of these respondent stories, the Spanish speakers, their stories are so spatial. So all of that is very, can be very, very practical.
Yeah. And I guess they always kind of involve a journey of some sorts, so that would also make a lot of sense. Otherwise you probably wouldn't be working where you are working. But it's interesting when you refer to the players in the story, because we learned that at university, to do like the little line on the left hand side, and then have like the people and the personal pronouns to make sure that you actually always know who the actors are in the story. And I never did that. I always hated it. I did it in my consecutive exams because the teachers would like look at the notes and stuff, and I didn't want to piss them off. But I've always hated it. I always found it very impractical and kind of pointless. So I kind of stopped it. But I find it very interesting that you, who uses it on a regular basis, are referring back to that method to keep track of the intricacies of the story. So that tells me maybe I should not have stopped using that. That's interesting.
Well, I think it's probably very dependent on your market, right? And what kind of interpreting you're working in. Because I remember when I was doing state courts, there weren't a lot of cases where it was really practical, because the stories would be much less spatial, much fewer players sometimes. So it kind of depends. There are times when I don't use that. And I remember when I learned it in a court course I was like, this seems very impractical and very difficult to implement. But then I found that actually sometimes it works wonders, depending on how detailed and convoluted the story somebody, you're consecutively interpreting is.
But then I have this might be going into too much detail, but I just have a really practical question. So, if you do it on a notepad, you flip the page, the people on the left-hand side are gone. So what do you do then? Like, do you just draw like the little symbols on the new page and then you refer to them with arrows, or like, how does that work? Or on the iPad, like, do you scroll up and down? Like,
yeah, so this is where the iPad I think is probably helpful. So when I have my different columns with the different players, usually by the time if I've been interpreting long enough to go through one page and we still have the same players, I've memorized the columns for the players.
Got it.
And if I need to refer back up to it, it's a very easy flick of the finger to scroll, and I don't have to rifle through pages, that's just one of the things that I can't even fathom doing anymore, having a notebook in front of me that I have to flip through physical pages for.
I did just have like one more question on the terminology, on like your symbols, because I'm imagining, I mean, obviously you do like the J for the judge and then the little pi symbol, which for me means something very different. So that's really funny.
Yeah, for me too.
I'm guessing for you it means politics as well, because for me
yes.
it's politics and then like politician and so on and so forth. Yeah. But so I'm guessing in court it's also sometimes very emotional, and I guess I actually don't know if it's important or not to cut into the judge. I guess it depends on like how they're judging the situation. I don't actually know.
This is getting controversial now. I have a lot of feelings about this.
So, but that's kind of the question. Like, do you translate or do you interpret all of the emotions? Do you have like your own little like quote unquote notes terminology for like emotional terminology that might come back and forth? Or do you just...
You mean as far as it conveying the emotion in your rendition?
Yeah. That's exactly
sure.
It.
So as when it comes to consec, I don't think that comes into play for my notes precisely, but it does play a big role in the consecutive interpretation in and of itself, because if somebody is very emotional in what they're talking about, then I am there to faithfully convey a message. And if my voice, if my expression, if my tone is completely devoid of emotion, how faithfully am I conveying a message? And this is my opinion.
Right.
You'll talk to 100 different interpreters and get 100 different answers, right? But so, of course, sometimes testimonies will get very emotional, and there are tears and there are pauses so people can compose themselves. And of course, I am not in no way completely replicating the emotion they're showing, but I do consider it my responsibility to, in some manner in my rendition, replicate that emotion to faithfully convey a message. Because if the judge can't hear the urgency that's conveyed in somebody's voice, I would consider that I'm not doing my job correctly.
Right. I agree.
So there we go. I mean, there have been a lot of situations where I've had to, take a deep breath and make sure that the Spanish speaker's emotion isn't affecting me too much, such that I can't, maintain my composure, that I can't be professional, because of course those two can be held hand in hand. You can relay emotion, but still have composure and be professional.
Yes.
So I want to keep those two side by side. But sometimes with how rough the stories get, I mean, we're talking about gang violence, human trafficking, stuff like that. It can get pretty intense, and you have to remember, or I have to remember, to just take a deep breath and I guess, bowl forward as much as possible, because it can get rough.
Right.
This is on a complete side note, but like on that probably warrants a whole different episode. But it just occurs to me that I've never really thought about what is more emotionally like investing, consecutive or simultaneous interpreting. Because when you're doing simultaneous, I think it's probably easier to affect the other person's emotion, like the emotion. But you don't have that much time to process. With consecutive, like you get the full story that affects them so deeply, and then you have to like watch them as well as they're telling it, and then you have to relay it. So you get the full impression and the full brunt of the emotion, but then on the flip side, you have more time to process it and kind of filter out what you want to convey. So that has just occurred to me, and I find that a very
interesting question. One of my favorite things to simultaneously interpret for the Spanish speakers is when they have an attorney, and at the end of their immigration trial, a lot of the times the attorney will give a closing argument, right? Kind of a plea to the judge about whatever the case is. And sometimes they're very impassioned, depending on the lawyer they have. And sometimes those are really, they're very charged, and they're very exciting to interpret because of the kind of the speed and the emotion they're trying to convey. And I love doing that simultaneously, because you're just that lag behind, but you can feel that kind of charge, the electricity in the air, and being able to be one step behind that for the Spanish speaker while they're getting to follow along. For me, that's very exciting. That's one of the things I love too. But with the consecutive, it may be a little bit because the emotion is like one step behind when you're doing it there, but it's definitely still something that you have to hold on to in your rendition to make it faithful, in my opinion.
I think so too. Well, Alex, you do a lot of consecutive interpreting as well, but for you, I'm guessing the situation is a lot less emotional at times, and it's much more like formal and a lot more like well, I guess in court it's also structured, but then for you it's formalized in a way, right?
Yeah, Alex, what does consecutive look like for you on a daily basis or weekly basis? I'm curious.
Actually, before we go into that, I had a question for you, Andrew. In terms of sort of your consecutive or note-taking technique, how much did you pick up at the various universities and courses you attended, and how much did you sort of develop yourself along the way, or how much did you pick up from colleagues? Because I know that certainly as students we were always obsessed with learning symbols by heart, and that was also somehow encouraged, for example. But I also remember that we got a lot of sort of practical tips for how to structure notes. So I'm wondering, did you have sort of a maybe not a complete but a good toolkit when you started, or did you have to learn a lot on the job, basically?
That's a great question.
That is a good question. I think it maybe was about 50-50. So I had a lot of tools. I had some tools under my belt, but I have been and continue to be terrified by consecutive.
That's a little confession right there.
The scariest thing that I do on a daily basis. And so I had to develop a lot for myself. I think what I had from university and from the interpreting departments were a lot of useful symbols and a lot of maybe of like the philosophy of consecutive, of getting down ideas rather than, individual words or things like that. That really helped me to understand kind of the idea by consecutive. But the struggle for me is when I really succeed in consecutive is when I know material like the back of my hand. So there's a lot of theory that you can pump into, in my opinion, in teaching consecutive, but it remains theory until the interpreter becomes really intimately familiar with the terminology in any given context.
Right.
Because I can do really, really longhand consecutive for medical settings because I am so familiar with the content in hospitals and clinics and whatever the case may be. But when I first got to court, I had to keep my consecutive really, really short because I was so unfamiliar with the vocabulary that might come up. But now as I get more and more comfortable, it becomes longer and longer, and I've developed my own systems because I can anticipate the vocabulary that's going to show up. But to answer, in summary, it's been about 50-50. I had a good basis, but I had to work on it a lot myself because it's because I think it's so out there. It's like this open, naked thing just sitting in front of your audience that anybody. And in immigration court especially, it's a very easy place to sort of, we call it couch quarterbacking, right? Where you can just be the referee without actually being involved in the game, right? And there are lots of bilinguals, and they can hear mistakes you make, and even if they catch your mistake, that doesn't mean jack squat about how well they would render a rendition, because they would probably bung it up even more.
Yeah.
But it's just the nerves of having that out there, and that to me is absolutely terrifying. But the becoming familiar with the vocab and also having a good note system and also having it paperless for me makes it so much easier and makes the quality of my rendition and my consecutive increase manyfold, I think.
I find that very intriguing to think about, that how the consecutive technique evolves over time. And I'm not sure if I misunderstood, but you said that it's getting longer, because the impression for me, at least in my consecutive practice, is that I sort of tend to note less and less over time, because of course you get more used to the scenarios that you work in, which is something that you've just mentioned, but also you can anticipate more, and I think you over time you just need to note down less and less. So did I maybe just misunderstand?
I think I meant that I'm able to take notes for a longer amount of time and deliver like longer consecutive rendition. Whether or not I'm taking more notes, I guess it depends on the individual.
Totally.
But before, I would have to keep in witness testimony in court, I would have to keep it pretty tight because I was so unfamiliar with what might come up. But now I can let them go for quite a long amount of time and be taking my notes, and then if that makes sense.
Okay, it makes total sense. Yeah, but Alex G was asking about my sort of consecutive practice, which is a little bit different because I work mostly in the political realm, but also to some extent in the technical realm. And actually, I think upon upon closer examination, much of the concept that I do is probably closer to sort of whispered interpreting or chuchotage, as we call it, because very often there are just these sort of time constraints, and people get very impatient and just feel. I mean, the language combination also plays a role because I work with English and German both ways, and of course, a lot of people in Germany understand English pretty well, but maybe they don't quite feel comfortable speaking English. So oftentimes you'll find yourself working into just one direction, or maybe just summarizing stuff briefly into the direction of German. So that plays a role.
Playing a walking dictionary.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
I got everything except for that one word. What was that again?
Or you just sit there and you've kind of tuned out because they don't need you, and then they'll ask you for this super technical term.
Half on, half off is my nightmare.
Yeah. Those are, funnily enough, the most exhausting jobs, when you just kind of sit there and you have to you don't actually take notes, you don't actually focus all that much because they
absolute worst.
Decided they don't need you, and then it's just
hard to 50% engage your brain. It's like the whole is fine, but it's that in between where it just drives me nuts.
Yeah,
totally.
But the thing is, you always work alone, right? Because I very often work with a second colleague, and we'll be able to take turns. But it seems not to be the case with you.
Not in immigration court, and that's one of the roughest things. They don't pay for team interpreting. In local state courts, they always do. For if an appointment's longer than 2 hours, always team interpreted. But I am in the courtroom. I am in the courtroom 8 hours a day by myself, and it is not how it should be. And I know there've been so many studies done about quality of interpretation after X amount of time of an interpreter going by themselves, but it's just one of the unfortunate conditions that exist in immigration court, and a lot of people are fighting for it and trying to get that changed, but that's just how it is right now.
Yeah.
It's funny, I've only ever once had a 2-person consecutive job. And I was amazed at how well it worked. I mean, it was kind of like because I'd never had it, and we were kind of thrown into the deep end because we were supposed to do whispered interpreting, but then one of the persons missed their flight, and then all of a sudden it was like, hey, you have to do this consecutive. They're just going to dial in from Heathrow. And we were like, great, this is fun.
Yeah.
But it worked amazingly well, and it was also with lawyers, and they kind of did that lawyery thing that interpreters love when they blame how things are not really going their way on the interpreter. And they were like, no, we didn't say that. And then you can actually look at your colleague's notes, who's also taking notes, and you're like, well, we've both written this down independently, so I'm pretty sure this is actually what you said. But
it's nice to have the support in a team. I mean, it makes a world of difference.
It's really good for your mental health.
Just psychologically, of knowing somebody's there to help you out if you're in a rough spot. I mean, that makes a world of difference.
And it really worked very well because we were both sitting there, and I mean, you don't really get a break. Luckily, it was only a 2.5-hour appointment, but we were always both continuously taking breaks. And then I think we switched about every 10 to 15 minutes in terms of who was actually doing the speaking. But you always see when the other person didn't catch a word or didn't understand what the other speaker was saying. And then you can always point at your notes when they're get to that particular part in the passage. And it's completely seamless. And I was really astonished at the system. It works. The system works.
It does. Yeah.
That was pretty cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Makes a world of difference.
It really does. Yeah. But I mean, we've already started talking about issues with consecutive interpreting and how people love it. Some people hate it.
Most people hate it. It's probably safe to assume.
Yeah. Right. We actually wanted to talk about the technology first, but maybe we can use that as a kind of a closing argument. What do you guys think? And because we've already started talking about the issues and what the challenges
let's maybe
are.
Stick with the issues.
Yeah. Because so Andrew, you were saying that one of the big things is that you're being exposed, and you have what did you call it, the couch quarterbacks?
Yeah, couch quarterbacking, right?
Yeah.
The bilingual judges or bilingual lawyers who just hear everything that's output. They hear both the original and then your rendition.
Absolutely.
And of course, people want to have opinions.
Yeah. So does it ever happen in court? Because it's happened to me once or twice, and I know it's happened to a colleague of mine a few times, that people call you out from the audience, or in your case, obviously from inside the court. That's wrong. That's not what they said. That's not that word. And then you kind of sit there and you're like, your entire credibility as the interpreter, in that situation is crucial. The other person doesn't.
It's like standing there with your pants down, basically.
You're saying, so this is all that they're relying on. Exactly. And especially if that's what they said, it's even worse because then the other party that you're interpreting for, they start doubting you. You
Mhm.
probably start doubting yourself for a second, and then you're like, no, I'm pretty sure this is what they said. This is
It's the
this is what
worst.
makes sense.
Yeah.
This is the only thing that makes sense. But then I don't know. Does this ever happen in court?
It definitely does happen. So there have been both situations where somebody objected to an interpretation or corrected or spoke up, and it wasn't correct. I definitely felt that my rendition was accurate. But then it's also happened where I made a mistake because, when somebody's going 7 hours by themselves, things start to get rough, and things are going to get a little bit lost. So there have been times where I've had to say the interpreter stands corrected. Thank you, counsel, for the correction. And there's sometimes where it happens in quite a supportive environment where there will be maybe a bilingual government attorney, and then the government attorney will make a little note at me, and then I'll be able to realize that I said something incorrectly and correct myself. Sometimes it happens in a more adversarial context where, for example, if the Spanish speaker's lawyer here's a mistake. A lot of the time they're defending their client. They want everything to be perfectly rendered for the record and things like that. And they will get a little bit testy if they didn't like some way something was interpreted. And sometimes the way they didn't things like is not founded. Sometimes it's like, okay, yeah, the interpreter misspoke. So both happen. And no matter which one it is, whether I stand by my interpretation or whether I need to stand corrected, it's just gut wrenching because Alex, you said it's like standing there with your pants down. You're exposed to the whole world, and your credibility. Even if you were right, it's like an attack against your credibility, and you feel like you messed it up, whether or not you really did. So that's one of the reasons why I think consecutive is so terrifying, because one little thing that you get wrong and everybody knows, and simultaneously you get one little thing nobody has time to pick up on and notice. And simultaneous to me is like my spa day, my little safe haven.
Spa day. My God.
But then it's just all out there in the open, which I think it's psychological, right? So I think once you overcome that psychological barrier, it does become a lot easier. But for me, I had to basically habituate until that psychological barrier was overcome. And it's become a lot better since, but at the beginning it was rough just because of how nervous I was.
Yeah, true. You just mentioned on the record there, so is it part of the job that you sometimes get recorded sort of via audio, or that you have to hand in your notes, or do you have to sort of destroy your notes before you leave the courthouse? Is there anything like that involved as well?
Sure. So as far as the recordings go, in immigration court, everything is recorded all the time. In state court, as far as I understand, it's not. So my rendition is never on the record. But in immigration court, it is. I have never been instructed as to destroying my notes, and I think that's probably mostly because people just don't know enough about the interpreter's work to say something or to really give us any direction as to what to do for that. But I usually do erase, I do destroy the ones that have personal information in them after I make a glossary with any relevant vocab that came up during the hearing. So that is my practice. I don't know what most other interpreters do, because the only one I know here in person or that I've ever met on the ground who uses an iPad to do that. So everybody else, presumably just has closets full. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if they're not destroying their notes, I know there's some laws in certain states about keeping records for businesses, and some interpreters think that their notes apply for that. So
yeah,
it's very location dependent, I think, and interpreter dependent.
Sure.
But it's actually very controversial, especially after the whole Trump incident with North Korea and the interpreter and the notes. So, Alex, you're right on the money. And I think actually for you, Andrew, I would kind of get if they took your notes, because, it might be vital. They might have missed like a thing. But then, Alex, for you, that's the exact situation that interpreter in North Korea was in. Like, have you ever been asked to provide your notes, or have people ever given you any, pun intended, notes on your notes as to what to do with them? And, especially because you also take them on an iPad. So there's a potential risk that you might be recording something as well, with the technology. And so, like, what do people say?
It's actually,
do they care?
It's no.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't think I've ever had one situation where anybody cared about the notes, or was sort of even remotely interested in that, or asked me to either destroy it or delete it afterwards. I mean, I usually do it myself because, I want to make sure that nothing, and to be honest, I don't really get to work at meetings that are that sensitive. I mean, it's fairly high level. Sometimes I work for commissioners and sort of ministers from Germany or from Austria, but usually those are technical discussions, and there isn't. I mean, usually the most interesting bit is the chit chat that you don't interpret anyway. When they have their photo opportunity before they get started, and that kind of stuff. But no, usually I'm the one who makes sure that stuff gets thrown away or deleted. Yeah, I feel like we should probably move on to the iPad stuff. I mean, we could talk for 3 hours. But we'll okay. No, if
Wait, how long's the recording already?
if you have, it is.
We're good. We're only at an hour.
I'm okay on time if you guys are. I just have to. I have about an hour before I need to make my way to court.
Okay. Yeah, we just have to make sure the episodes
Wait, I
are
thought
not
it
2
was a
hours.
day off.
It is, but I got called it. It's just a quick thing. I just have to go for like an hour.
Just like 3 hours solo, no big deal.
No, it's fine.
I love it.
It'll be great. And I'm having a glass of wine before, so my interpretation will be extra quality.
It'll be super fluid. Yeah.
Yeah,
These
the
are
most.
the best outtakes we've ever had. No, okay.
Okay, Alex.
No, I get it. You're right. Because we could talk about.
Bring on your question, and then we'll move on to the iPad stuff.
No, it was just I don't even know if it was a question. It was kind of like
more of a comment, really.
No, it wasn't really more of a comment. It was more of like a philosophical discourse. Because I'm wondering, like, where you guys draw the line. I'm guessing in your situations it doesn't really come up that often. Maybe Andrew in yours it does. Where like what for you makes consecutive interpreting and what makes dialogue interpreting?
Ooh.
Because I've been in situations where it's been like a dialogue between people, but then like one person talked for 5 minutes and then the other person replied for 3, and they were just, like that's consecutive, but then it's not the taught case where you deliver a speech or whatever.
Right. So that kind of consecutive where it's sort of delivering a speech like you see in a lot of like they teach you in interpreting departments. I don't really do that. So where you're going on for minutes at a time. It's much shorter. I mean, the longest I would probably ever let somebody speak, depending on what the content is a minute perhaps. And the thing is, most judges do not trust the interpreter to let the Spanish speaker keep going for so long. So I try to stop the Spanish speaker before the judge does, because the judge doesn't speak Spanish, so doesn't know at what point they're cutting off the Spanish speaker, but I do. So I try to control that. But for certain things that the Spanish speakers are saying, sometimes I can let them go for a while. But I mean, maybe it would be defined as dialogue interpreting based on how you're describing it. But it's a lot of back and forth. So it's the judge asks a question, the Spanish speaker answers. So question answered. Sometimes the answers are very long. Sometimes it's a yes or no. It totally depends. So I qualify that as consecutive. I don't know if I've ever been in a situation where I'm like, this is dialogue interpreting. I guess it depends on how you see that. I'm not quite sure what to envision when you say dialogue.
Well,
what's the difference really? I mean, I'm not really sure.
No, that's the question, because like in
I mean, a traditional consec is like when you have a dinner speech. I mean, that's because there's no dialogue involved. But I mean, I rarely ever do that. I mean, that's something we did at university.
That's my point.
But,
I mean, I've done that a few times. Like a press conference here, or like those pre-alignment calls that I mentioned at the very beginning. They're always completely one-directional. But most of the consecutive, or whatever you want to call it, that I've done throughout my career was a dialogue between people. So there was a question and an answer, or a presentation and an answer to that presentation. So that's why I've always wondered, for me, consecutive is kind of like everything where you take notes, and then there's like shades of that. There's like the dinner speech, there's a press conference, there's, I don't know, a roundtable discussion or whatever. Right. But for me, that kind of all falls under the consecutive umbrella. I don't know if that's the...
But dialogue could be like whisper too. That's a dialogue as well. So
yes.
And you don't necessarily take notes then. So yeah, it's a bit of a philosophical discussion. But
yeah, that's why I mentioned it. It wasn't really a question, but it also wasn't really a comment.
More of a non sequitur.
We're ruminating, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry, no offense.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Right, but if you want to, guys, we can move on to the technical stuff.
Let's do some geeking out.
Yes, please. Let's nerd out. Let's get our nerd on.
I actually don't really know if it's going to be a lot of a discussion, because we're both working with the same setup. So that's
That's true.
That's
But
not going to be a very fruitful discussion, is it?
no, but I mean, I think it can be sort of interesting for other people to listen to who haven't made the switch yet,
That
or
is
maybe
correct.
just interested in what it's like. So I'm wondering. I mean, my origin story I've told before, probably even on this show, is that I was on a consec job. I didn't bring it. It's sort of in the morning, and I got up late or something like that, or there was something with the kids that needed to be resolved. I don't quite recall, but I didn't have enough paper with me, and then I just had one pen. I didn't have replacement or spare pens, and sort of I ran out of paper, and the pen broke, and I basically had to switch over to my iPad. Otherwise, I would have had to sort of interrupt the whole session, which wasn't really an option, and that's how I did my first tablet interpreting session, basically. So I'm wondering, I hope that in your case it was a little bit more deliberate and sort of pre-planned, but maybe we can just quickly tell our origin stories there. So what about you, Andrew?
I think mine was definitely more intentional. I'm trying to remember what gave me the idea originally. It wasn't any sort of, I guess, crisis scenario like you're
That's
describing.
good. Yeah, that's not what you want.
Right. It was out of a desire, I think, maybe number one, to have a mostly paperless existence for my job. And then second of all, to just have to carry around less. Because when I was going to appointments before, I have my spiral bound notebook. I have a book for reading. I have different, I guess, what would you call them? Sort of intake forms to bill the agencies, right? Carry all of that with me. I wanted to consolidate all of that, and the fact that I could use it for consec was just, the cherry on top. And that was last, I guess, I think maybe November or October that I started, and I haven't even looked back for a fraction of a second. I mean, it's completely, I don't mean to be too melodramatic, but it's completely changed how I, do everything for work, not just the consecutive, but I mean, the billing. I never have my laptop anymore. I go on my laptop less than once a month now.
Ooh,
so
nice.
For me, it's not about, it's the whole, it's not like it's not working harder, it's working smarter, and having the tablet.
What's a computer?
Yeah, totally.
I know, what is this? I mean, who even uses a laptop?
Oh my God. As we're all recording on a laptop, I love it.
Well, yeah,
hilarious. Yeah.
Of course, you sometimes need it, but I mean, for me, it's just made everything so much slicker, and I can spend much less time on things that I was spending more time on before because I had to do it all on paper.
Yeah.
So it's just about a kind of, I guess, making that process more efficient for me, so I don't have to spend time like I did before.
Yeah, completely agree. Just a quick note on the laptop, though. I could technically do this on a tablet, so I'll probably do that next time just to prove a point. But anyway,
maybe we would have sound issues if I had done this on my tablet.
Oh yeah, who knows? Who knows? Yeah, but what I wanted to say on the paperless stuff is actually a good point, because I used to have to carry around sort of old speeches because when I give speeches like for practice purposes for colleagues or students or whatever, I usually prepare them with concept notes as well. So when I use the iPad, I just have my entire archive of speeches with me all the time without having to schlep around notebooks and stuff. And that's something that I found really useful, because sometimes, somebody will ask you, are you free during the lunch break? I'm trying to add a language. The test is tomorrow. Can we just do a quick session or something like that? And then it's really nice to be able to say yes, because you have all the speeches right there on your iPad. That's nice.
Exactly. And glossaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And dictionaries. I mean, because I fly so much and travel, I don't want to have to bring 1, 2, 3 different paper dictionaries with me. It's just very impractical. And so I have them all right there, and it's literally seconds away. I have my main dictionaries and links to glossaries on my dock. So if I'm in my notes doing consec and I need to look up something really quick, it takes probably 5 seconds.
Very cool. Yeah. What about you, Alex? When did you start, and why, and how, and
Mine is a lot less glamorous and like a lot less professional than you guys. I just saw the new iPad Pro and I was like,
I feel like we're speed dating.
Awesome shit. This is like the best thing I have to have it.
It's
and
gadget
like,
lust.
Hey, say again?
Gadget lust.
Yeah, it was gadget lust, total gadget lust. And then I was like, you know what? If I do some consecutive assignments on this, I can totally justify the expense.
It's
And
a
then I
company
bought it.
expense after all, or
Yeah,
business
exactly.
expense
It's like
rather.
a total write-off,
Yeah.
plus the keyboard, plus the pencil, and whatever. And so I got it, and then it was like
basically a treat yourself moment.
it was
Totally.
basically a treat yourself moment with the intention to use it for consecutive. And then I actually plan on using it 3 times, and those 3 consecutive jobs, those first 3 consecutive jobs, got turned into sim jobs. And then I was like, well, great, now I can't use it again. But
Oh.
I actually have used it now for consecutive quite a few times, and I really like it. I still do carry around, at the moment, I'm carrying around like 4 notepads with me, just because every time you go into a booth, the equipment providers give you like a free notepad. And I've in the past been in the booth and I've put the iPad in between me and the colleague, so we can take notes on a note-taking app, just like a regular notepad. But no one's ever dared touch the iPad to like take notes when I'm interpreting. So I feel like on the colleague's part, there's like a little bit of a barrier.
Yeah,
like they just don't want to use it. I'm guessing, it's like an expensive piece of equipment and it's mine, and they probably don't want to do anything. So I feel like in the booth, I haven't used it just as a notepad. I still use it in the booth and it's great and it works perfectly fine. But so for that reason, I still carry around some notepads. But yeah, I like consecutive on it, I have to say.
Yeah, it's the same for me. But I need to ask you guys a question. Did you just start out on the job, or did you do a little bit of practice beforehand? Because when I sort of do workshops and training with the tablet, I always say, you can use the tablet for consecutive. This is how you do it. But please, 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 please practice. Don't just take it on the job and start out. But yeah, I can see your face, Alex G. There. You do realize that you just jumped in at the deep end, right?
I kind of did. I thought about it.
Wow.
I thought about it intellectually. So I thought about the workflow.
Fancy way of saying it.
I talked to you about it because I was wondering. So for me, the biggest thing was, and Andrew, we even had a conversation about this on Twitter. I remember that too, about like what app you use for Consec, and then how do you do like the flip of the notepad? Like when you're done with one section with the notepad, you just flip it back and then you're started with a clean slate. Whereas on the iPad, if you do like, what's it called? GoodNotes, I think it is.
I do Notability.
Notability, that's it.
That's where it's at. Yeah, but GoodNotes is nice too.
So if you do Notability, it's like one long sheet of paper, of imaginary paper. And then I was like, so how do you find where you started that particular section and so on and so forth. And so for me, I tried that, not with the speech, but like in hypothetical, I just like scribbled some notes and I was like, okay, if I had to find it very quickly, would I be able to? And I've actually started, and I've told you, Alex, you didn't really approve of the solution, but I've started using Apple Notes. And for me, it works exactly like a proper notepad would because of the workflow that I use it with or in. And I didn't practice it at home, but I not with the speech again. I scribbled around and I was like, does this work for me? Okay, it does work. But yeah, I feel like that's going into too much detail. If you guys want to know more about that, then I can tell you more. But
we can go into detail in a minute. Yeah.
I feel like I'm mostly here as an evangelist for listeners to say anybody who's not using a tablet should consider it.
Right. Yeah.
It just makes it's time efficient. It makes your life easier and it makes your life better. And it's upped my quality of life. It's like I'm on an infomercial or something.
No, but it's totally true. Yeah,
it is true. It is true.
And we should probably point out that we do not get any payments from any technology company for doing this episode or this segment.
But if they did want to pay me, I'd be down for that.
Yeah, we totally should get
at least with some iTunes vouchers.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so did we ask you, Andrew, how you got into it? Did you do any sort of pre-planning or were you just totally ready to start?
I think I did a little bit of testing around beforehand just to make sure it was smooth and I knew how to use the app. But I maybe spent 5 or 10 minutes on it before I took it into an actual appointment. And because of this might be too much detail, but because of how Notability works, you have easy functions to be able to refer back to notes before. So I find it much easier than even flipping back through pages, because the distraction in an appointment of flipping through pages for me is pretty significant. Versus Notability allowing you to flick to the beginning within 1 or 2 little touches. So for me, it was a very easy transition. There were no bumps. I've never had a technological failure. My iPad,
Yeah, me
even
neither.
if I'm on it all day for 8 hours, it never goes below 50%.
Yeah, the battery life is just fine. That's true. Yeah. Should we maybe talk about the hardware first because I think a stylus is an absolute prerequisite. So
Oh yeah,
I take it we all use sort of the Apple Pencil, like the official
yes, the
stylus,
Yeah,
official Apple
definitely.
Pencil
which happens to be
magnet.
yeah, it's super expensive, but it's also I think the best if you want to use this for
It is
consec.
worth it.
Yeah, I think it's the
Yeah,
best option. Yeah.
absolutely. But Alex, I'm actually curious because you in your trainings and your webinars, like you tell people to like practice beforehand. But like, what do you imagine? What would that practice look like for you in your training? Like, what do you recommend people do before jumping in?
Right. Yeah, I need to give a shout out at this point to Josh Goldsmith, who's my partner in crime for this sort of tablet interpreting stuff. And we've done a lot of webinars together, and we have a very cool project coming up. So here's a little bit of a teaser.
Teaser.
Teaser. Yeah, and we usually recommend people practice a little bit, and that could be yeah. For example, if you go to a practice session with colleagues or with your fellow students, if you're at university, you should of course prepare your speeches with concept notes. I think that's really best practice because it gives you the opportunity to practice your notes at the same time as you practice your speech making skills. So I think that's one thing that you should do. And then the easy step is to just ditch the paper and the pen and to do it on your tablet because when you prepare a speech, you're not in the heat of the moment of a concept job. You have time, you can sort of reflect a little bit. You can delete something, try again, and maybe find a better symbol. And you shouldn't be too nerdy or too detail obsessed about it, but it's just sort of a safe space where you can test that out and practice it. Or maybe you can just do not just the giving speeches, but also when somebody gives a speech for you and you practice your note taking skills, just do it on the tablet, during one of those practice sessions. When something goes wrong, it's not really a big deal. You start again or you do, do another speech. Just so you can get used to, I think, the whole sort of handling and feeling. What is it like to do that on a slab of glass, I guess, as opposed to
Right.
a piece of paper? Because there are maybe we can get into that a little bit because there are things that are different. For example, there are these tricks that you learn when you do it on a piece of paper. For example, the sort of classic fold out cheat sheet that you
Yes.
mentioned earlier, where you can sort of have some figures or names. You can't really do that on a tablet, but there are other ways of doing it. And then also finding the right app that suits sort of your mental model of what the workflow should be like. For example, Andrew and I, we both use Notability because it has this sort of endless scrolling, which I think we both like. But
I
other
love it.
people, might feel more comfortable with sort of the whole page turning metaphor, I guess. And there are
Yeah,
different apps that
exactly.
cater to different tastes. So I think I think it makes a lot of sense to sort of explore that and sort of settle with what you like and what works for you before you try it on the job.
Can I ask you guys a really specific question about the iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil?
Sure, we can
Do
always
you
edit it out.
guys? Yeah, sure. Do you guys use the pencil double tap feature for the eraser?
Ooh, yes, this is a very specific
I
question.
turned that off.
I do not. I turned it off as well.
I turned it off.
It had too many false positives, basically.
Exactly. That happened to me a few times, and then it kind of annoyed me. But now I feel like I want to use it, but then it feels like I have to focus so much on not like changing the grip on the pencil to
Exactly.
accidentally trigger a double tap that
Right.
it
Yes.
isn't really worth it. But I want to use it because it's good.
Yeah, but I
Okay.
use it for other stuff. I mean, I use it for example, I use the iPad for editing this podcast, and I do it with
Right.
a pencil. And there, it has some features where you can use it, or maybe for drawing, where you're more
Right.
deliberate. But yeah, Andrew, you
Yeah.
were going to say something.
Oh, I was just saying I've never run across a moment where I wished I could use the double tap feature and it wasn't on. It wasn't practical for me. But I understand that it's very useful for some tasks.
Yeah. I found it cumbersome too.
Mm.
Like it never did it when I needed it, and then it did it when I didn't need it.
Right, exactly.
It's kind of
Yeah.
yeah.
But I'm just going to be, that old fart for a minute, because I still remember practicing some sort of consec on an old iPad with one of these dumb styluses that didn't have sort of a Bluetooth connection and stuff, and that was so tiresome. And I think the
No
first
palm rejection. How could you?
exactly, yeah, and then
Right.
sort of the software tried to emulate that, but it didn't really work all that well. But now we finally have a setup where it really works, and yeah, I just like that. I wanted to take a moment to appreciate that, I guess.
To be fair, when I had my Surface tablet, I dabbled in consecutive on what's it called? The Purple Notes app that Microsoft has.
OneNote?
Yes, OneNote. I tried to do consecutive on OneNote, and after like 2 seconds, I was like, "This is not going to work." Or for me, at least, like this was never going to work. But then with the iPad, it just felt very
natural.
Natural.
It is natural. Yeah, it is.
The
It
word
is
you were
just more
looking
natural.
for. Yeah. No, I mean, every time I look at OneNote, my head explodes. It's just.
Yeah, I mean, it's not.
It's not good for
consecutive.
No.
Nope.
Right. I think any interpreters who are wondering what it's like should just, I mean, if possible, go to an Apple store and just write a little bit on the iPads and see how it goes.
Totally.
What they think, because you have that option available to you if you have an Apple store close by, and you don't have to wonder what it might be like. You can figure it out.
And actually, I think that Notability is even part of the sort of the demo software that they have on iPads. I think Notability is actually in there, so you can even try that particular app, which is great.
Or Apple Notes, which some people also use for consecutive.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm not judging anyone.
No, but to be fair, I actually have to say that I had some troubles in the beginning with writing on the iPad because it is basically a piece of glass, a slab of glass, and I felt it was quite strange.
Interesting.
Also coming from the Surface, because the Surface Pen has different tips which change the friction on the surface. So you could be like completely smooth, or you can have like a lot of friction, and it would feel a little bit more like paper. On the iPad, it was completely smooth because it's like a hard plastic tip for the Apple Pencil, and then obviously it's on glass. So that really took me a while to get comfortable writing on, I have to say. So yeah, so that was like a little bit of not a learning curve, but just to get used to it. And now it feels like second nature.
That's what I meant. Yeah, it's just different. Yeah. You need to get used to it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just different. Yeah.
Have you tried out any of those sort of screen protectors, like I think one's called like the Paper-like, that try to sort of emulate a rougher surface or anything like that? Because I didn't really like that.
You have, Andrew. You said you have?
I do. I have like it creates for like a matte cover, so it doesn't. It's anti-glare, I guess, is what it's called, and it also makes the writing feel. I don't know if it's the one that makes it feel paper-like, because they have those ones for those artists to try to replicate the feeling of paper. It does change the feel of it. It's not as like slick, I guess, as if writing directly on the glass. You have a little bit of that. I guess that separating layer, but it doesn't affect the reaction time or anything like that. It's just as easy as before. So,
and again, what's sort of the situation that you use the iPad in? Do you sometimes use it standing up? Because Andrew, you said sometimes you're going on location, quote unquote location, into these facilities. Do you find yourself standing up? Is that an issue with the iPad? Because my contact is usually sort of sitting down at a conference table, which is quite comfortable.
So luckily, I am usually sat down. In detained facilities without a courtroom, I am usually just sat down at a chair without a desk, so I have it on my lap in front of me. In medical settings, which I don't do so much these days, I do usually stand up, but it's never been a problem for me. I have the 11-inch one, and I find it very comfortable to hold in my hand and write at the same time. So I've never thought, oh, I wish this were ergonomically different because it's uncomfortable. It's always been perfectly fine.
No, because sometimes there are these sort of specific cases, and some of them even come with sort of a loop where you can put your hand in. I think that's like intended for engineers who go on sites and
oh wow!
But I've never tried it myself, and I'm wondering if that's really necessary. I actually have the same experience that you have, Andrew. That it's perfectly.
I've never thought something like that would be necessary. I can understand how some people would find it useful.
Yeah.
Do you guys use it with a case? Because I found when I don't use it with a case and I put it on the table, sometimes it's a little slippery because my hand starts like pushing it. So I do have like a folio case around it with like fake leather. So I find that helpful when it's on a table. When it's not on a table, when you're holding it in your hand, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. But
I use the folio, the what's it called? The keyboard folio.
There's keyboard.
And
folio,
then I have it
on
a sleeve as well, like a carrying case. It's what's it called? It's called Pack and Smooch, which is actually a German brand.
How cute!
Love it. Shout out.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah, shout out. It is a little bit slippery depending on the surface it's on, but wow, we're getting into a lot of detail, a lot of nerd detail now.
Yeah.
But
I know, right?
helps with the slickness a little bit, but I like the extra protection as well because it is so thin. I mean, it's thinner than the iPhone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is totally crazy. That's right.
That's crazy. But I have to say that it's really nice if you do some consecutive, because some of my jobs were actually like walking around, on location when you're doing interviews or whatever, or you're standing up somewhere. And I've always found the notepads to be quite cumbersome. So I actually had this like leather little, folio thing where I had the notepads in, so they would have some added stability, so I could actually take the notes.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
With the iPad, it's really nice because you just hold it in the hand; it doesn't flop around. So that is an actual advantage over a notepad I've found
because it's quite rigid. Yeah, totally,
absolutely.
So maybe to round this off, you mentioned that earlier, Alex, that you tried using the iPad sort of as a notepad in the booth during simultaneous, which didn't really work out. But it's the same for me actually. In the booth, I usually just use it as a reference tool to look at my documents, and you maybe do a quick web search or check something in a glossary, and the whole sort of using it as a notepad hasn't really taken off for some reason.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But do you then still have a traditional notepad in the booth for simultaneous, or how does that look?
Yeah, I do.
I don't, but we usually have sort of a few sheets of paper in the booth that I sometimes use, mostly don't use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mostly don't use.
I have this paper allergy,
Yeah, but I mean, when the client gives it to you, you just kind of take it and run with it. But yeah.
But it's great that you mentioned client, because that reminded me of a question that I did want to ask you. Is the whole, and Josh actually looked at this during one of his research projects, is the whole perception by the clients. I mean, how do your client do they even care? Do they take note? Do they comment on it? Does it make you look modern, professional? Is there anything that you have sort of taken away from your clients and their reactions to you using the iPad? For me, it's very quick. Nobody ever cares. Nobody ever notices. That's about it. Maybe once or twice, but it's been almost nothing. So I'm wondering what it's like for you guys.
I've never had a comment on negatively. I've had a lot of people be like, "Oh wow, I've never seen an interpreter use an iPad before," and then some judges think it's very like technologically advanced, very trendy. They'll be like, "Wow," because sometimes I'll give it to the judge in state court to sign the invoice or whatever the case is, or not.
Oh, that's like so cool.
A timesheet. Cool. So I'll hand them the iPad because nice. I use what's it called? I use Adobe Sign and Fill.
Right.
Yes.
I think it's the app. So I give them my pen and literally just sign as if it were normal paper, and they can see the whole form in front of them. I feel like there's high visibility, right? So they know exactly what they're signing. And in those contexts, they've always commented. I've never had anybody make some sort of adverse comment about privacy or about distractions or anything like that. It's either been anywhere from neutral to positive comments. But I am sometimes worried that it looks like perception of, anything could be done on this iPad. You could doing media, whatever the case is. I don't want to give a distracted interpreter, but for me, pros outweigh the cons, where I am willing to, educate people to let them know, hey, this is really helping me do my job better because this isn't me. So that's how I approach it.
Yeah. So I don't actually think anyone's ever formed like a solid opinion about me using an iPad. I do think in that board call that I mentioned, one of the board members has the old iPad Pro. So I think the first time that I came in there, he was like looking at me a little sideways, and I was like, and I think he didn't really appreciate it. But I think that might just all be in my head, and I just kind of enjoyed that moment.
Yeah. Right. I get it though.
Yeah, but like nobody's ever said anything. But Andrew, I get what you're saying. Sometimes clients, especially if we're in a booth and then like while I'm not interpreting and it's a relatively easy conference, like I might have put on Angry Birds when it's not my shift, and or the technician has seen it and whatever, and then you kind of have like this funny little exchange about whatever you're doing on the iPad. But then it's kind of like, well, you can also do all of these things on a computer, so it's really not that different.
That's true, yeah.
So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just, I actually had one colleague who was super impressed by it because she, after the conference, after the entire day was done, she said that she asked me what kind of a tablet it was. And I was like, well, it's an iPad. And she's like, oh, I hate Apple, but I really want something exactly like this because I think this is the future.
Too bad.
And I was like, well, I didn't really like Apple, but this was really great. So maybe you should give it a try. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
That's funny.
I offered her some free consultation on everything. But we'll see.
Maybe we need a Troublesome Terps episode about like, Android versus Apple debate sort of thing.
Oh no, that is way too troublesome. I cannot get into this.
Very controversial. It ended bloodshed.
Yeah. We were actually set up quite well
God.
for that, Alex, aren't we? Because we use both platforms sort of interchangeably.
Yeah, that's
Both Android
true.
and...
Do you know, actually,
you even use all three of them. You have a Windows
Exactly. Do you
thing.
remember the very first episode that you and I ever did together was for Lang FM? And back then I had an Android phone, an old iPad, and a Windows laptop. And we were both laughing at that. And we said, well, it's not really working out for me because it was quite difficult back then. But now that everything is in the cloud, everything is synced anyways. Like, it's just so seamless. It's just not even an issue anymore. And it just made me laugh.
That's true. I mean, I consider like I had my dad started buying Apple products in the late 80s. And so we always had, iMacs and whatever the case was growing up. So for me, it's like, I always explain it as like, Apple is like my native language. I do not think, I do not believe it is superior or inferior to any other language in the world. There are lots of languages, but it's just the one I grew up on and I feel comfortable and it's safe and it's cozy. And so I'm not like an Apple evangelist, but it's like, I've never had anything different and it works so well. Why should I change? I mean, it's just,
you just completely made my day, Andrew. I think nobody has ever put it quite so well.
That's actually a really nice metaphor. Yeah.
I mean, it's true. That's just always how it's been for me. So I see no reason to change. And I understand the pros and cons on both sides.
Of course.
But I was literally raised on Apple. So
yeah.
Why learn another language?
Exactly. And like as Alex knows very well, never change a running system. Right, Alex?
Sure. Different question. No, but what I was going to say is that I did try a few Android tablets, and while they're okay and they have their own advantages, I never would have felt comfortable enough to use them for a consecutive job. Whereas with the iPad, I tried it and I said, "This is absolutely no big deal. I can use this, no worries at all."
But on that note, Alex, because you also have a new phone, you've got the Samsung Note phone. A colleague of mine from London actually, way back when, started buying Samsung Notes, and then he actually sold his tablet, he sold his laptop, and started doing everything on the Samsung Note. So I don't know how that went, but he did it. And he also did consecutive interpreting jobs on the Samsung Note because it also has the built-in stylus, which might actually be a bit neater than the iPad because it's like pull out, so you can't lose it accidentally. So it's just like in there. But that's a discussion for a different day. But he did all of that on the phone. So it's also an option.
Neat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite neat. I was quite impressed.
I think it's a little bit too small for me, but...
Yeah, but then he also had a really tiny notepad with it. so. And he had a very cool holographic Bluetooth keyboard. Very space age. That was super cool.
A holographic keyboard. Okay.
Yeah, very, very space age.
Beautiful.
Great. I'm really wondering if we have given people ideas now, or if people are thinking, I just don't get it, this whole tablet interpreting stuff. What are they talking about? So we're going to see what the feedback is like. But
just one more thing before we wrap things up, because we actually just had this the other day on Twitter. If you get an iPad and if you intend to use it for anything else than pure consecutive jobs, if you intend to use it in the booth, do a little bit of research, probably do like a few of Alex's trainings on what apps you should use, on the adapters you need, especially with iPadOS coming up. You can totally plug in a USB stick, but you will need an adapter. So all of those things are things to consider, but it's now totally an option. So here we go.
Yeah.
Amen.
Great. Well, it's been fantastic to have you on this episode, Andrew. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really fun. It's been nice meeting you guys virtually and also, nerding out with you. And thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It was awesome.
And I hope it's useful for others, not just the tablet interpreting stuff, but also sort of the discussion around consecutive that we had, because I feel like sometimes it gets a rap, and
Yeah.
getting used less and
Yeah.
less, at least in sort of the conference interpreting field. So I feel like we should sort of stand up for consecutive, team consec represent.
Definitely. And also
Yeah.
just so people know that if they find consecutive terrifying and horrible and the worst thing that's ever happened to them, they are not alone.
Exactly.
There is support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone finds it horrible and terrifying.
Maybe we should open like a support group for
Yeah.
consec, for people who hate consec but also totally love consec.
The Consecutives
Yeah.
Anonymous, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Consecutive anonymous. I mean, when you deliver a really good consec, I mean, it's like magic. I mean, I just
Yes.
feel
Right?
I'm
It's
I'm
the
on
best.
cloud 9, and there's
Yeah.
no greater high than this. No drug could beat this.
Absolutely.
And also no client will ever get as impressed by any simultaneous rendition as they will with a flawless consecutive rendition, because they will
Absolutely.
see what you're doing there and they will already have forgotten the entire speech, and then you deliver it into flawless Spanish and they're just floored.
Yeah,
So
I love that. That's
Yeah.
one of the most beautiful moments.
And the thing is also that people sometimes talk about flow in interpreting, and I think the closest I've ever gotten to flow was probably doing consecutive and not simultaneous.
Oh wow.
So there you go.
That's a controversial statement.
That is, I definitely feel the flow more for simultaneous, but I think it's because I'm in that Zen zone much more often.
Yeah.
Because my
Okay.
simultaneous is quite strong, so I'm not in a state of like constant panic like I am with consecutive.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And no one when you're doing consecutive, when you're doing simultaneous, someone says, yes, that's correct, or no, that's wrong, because they don't know. So they
True. This is
Yeah.
true. Well said.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah.
And on that happy note, we'll close out this episode.
Yes, we will.
Shout out to Jonathan. We hope you're back on the show next. In fact, I know he's back for the next episode because we're recording this tomorrow. Again, thanks to Andrew. Thanks to
Yes, sorry to have missed you, Jonathan.
yeah. We'll catch up another time. That's fine. I guess that's it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We can all say bye. Usually I cut in the bye at the end, so we just say bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, goodbye.
Cool. Very nice.
That's awesome.